Hello and welcome to Great Lakes in Depth. I'm Rick Mixter, and today we're going to do some whale watching. These ships were known as whalebacks due to their submarine-like shape. We'll take a look at these unique ships and dive to the remains of a whaleback that was lost in Lake Michigan. We'll also swim the cool, clear waters of Lake Superior, where we'll find the D Leuty. And we'll meet Joyce Hayward, a teacher who uses diving to teach in the classroom. All that in a creature close-up on the lake trout on this edition of Great Lakes in Mention whales on the Great Lakes and most people would think you're crazy. But at one time you could look out over the water and see whalebacks. Alexander McDougall was certainly a visionary, although many people made fun of him when he designed a ship that would be more stable in the lakes. His cigar-shaped vessel with a flat bottom would be called a whaleback, but the shape of the bow would earn the nickname Pig Boat. In 10 years, there would be over 40 whalebacks built, including the passenger ship Christopher Columbus. Few people were laughing now as the Columbus set passenger records year after year. Not all whalebacks had such glorious careers, though. The Henry Cort was launched as the Pillsbury in 1892, and in over 40 years on the lakes, it would be a shipwreck at least 3 times. It was recovered from a stranding in Bar Point in 1917, and again sunk in 1933 near Detroit. The Cort was also infamous for residents in Muskegon, where it sank a fishing boat, killing 2 anglers. The Henry Cort became a permanent resident of Muskegon on December 1, 1934, when a storm pushed it against the breakwall. Locals rushed to the beach to watch the rescue, as they had just 4 years prior when the Salver was overwhelmed near shore. Only a few feet from the breakwall, the wind and waves prevented the Coast Guard from boarding the ship, and they lost a young 23-year-old sailor trying to get a line to the ship. Newspapers rushed to get the headlines out, and the first edition proved to be thankfully incorrect. 25 sailors were rescued, tied together like mountain climbers to survive the quarter-mile walk down the breakwall to the beach. Only 2 would be hospitalized, but the Cort sailing days were over. Today, little remains of the 316-foot-long whaleback. Most of the metal was salvaged, as was much of the machinery. Her boilers still remain on the bottom, as do sections of steel hull. Pieces do remind divers that this was a ship, especially when you reach near the end of the breakwall, where the mooring rings still lie. The Pig's Nose, for one of the last pig boats. Nearly all of the Great Lakes have claimed whalebacks. In fact, Lake Superior has at least 2, the Sagamore near Sault Ste. Marie, and also the Thomas Wilson near Duluth. Lake Erie took the Colgate back in 1916, and Lake Huron has the Clifton. To the best of my knowledge, only the Thomas Wilson and the Sagamore have been located. What happened to the rest of the whalebacks? The largest of them, the Erickson, was also the last whaleback steamship built. It was retired in 1963 and scrapped 5 years later. 2 years later, the last whaleback on the lakes ran aground near Marquette. The Meteor was retired and put ashore permanently near its birthplace in Superior, Wisconsin. It is now a museum ship, open for tours to the public. Why weren't there any more whalebacks built? Historians note the rounded sides decreased the size of the hatch covers, and unloaders had a tough time getting cargo out of the holds. Alexander McDougall's design had outlived its usefulness, but his ships would ply the lakes and oceans for nearly 70 years. McDougall himself would be honored with a whaleback in his name, with a strange twist. Forever teased as the inventor of the pig nose, the ship McDougall was the only whaleback built without a snout. I have to admit to being a bit biased when it comes to diving Marquette. This is my hometown, and I grew up swimming in the chilly waters of Lake Superior. Superior is so clear that you can see the remains of the steamship right from the surface, which is amazing when you note the water is over 30 feet deep. Divers are dwarfed by the large sections of hull that remain on the bottom, all that's left after the D Leuty hit the rocks in a blinding snowstorm. Built in Ohio in 1882, the 180-foot freighter didn't stand a chance Halloween night as Superior smashed the ship before it could make safe harbor. Now it rests in silence, only 250 yards from a Coast Guard rescue station. Divers will find pieces scattered around the site, including the rudder and what looks like a crumpled water tank. DeLudi is a first-time shipwreck for many students trained in Marquette, and part of a collection of wrecks that extend from the harbor to the Huron Islands. Boat access is recommended for the D Leuty, although you can see the buoy from shore. It's a heck of a swim. It's exciting to hear about school programs that are teaching our youngsters about the Great Lakes. These take on a variety of forms, from school ships to the teacher that stir the children's imaginations about what's underwater. Joyce Hayward is a teacher, both in and out of the classroom. Diving is not only recreation, but also a teacher in service of sorts. She's always finding something new to talk about in the classroom.
I start out my 4th grade science class with a unit on oceanography, which they just love. I've carried a saltwater tank into my classroom and gotten that started, and of course the kids just love the scuba gear. So yes, I've been able to use that. I've also been able to use the Great Lakes and the ships within the Great Lakes as a part of my educational process as well.
One of the lucky few to have dove the treasure ship Atosha, Joyce surprises a lot of people when she says her best adventures are in freshwater.
I know for a lot of folks it's the ocean and all the beautiful coral and the fish, and I have a lot of interest in that, but my real love is the shipwrecks in the Great Lakes.
Why the Great Lakes?
Well, I guess our ships are so much more intact, and just the feeling of history when I'm diving on them, the presence of mankind. The first time that I dove a wooden shipwreck, I didn't know anything about it, and I could see the recreational value, but I knew that there was a lot more. There was the history to learn, there was the construction of the ship, there was the story of the people and why they were sailing on the ship, why it went down, and then, of course, understanding what the construction of the ship was. So it's pretty encompassing, and that's where my interest has really developed.
Her interest is now helping elementary-age kids learn more about their environment.
The school children just get really excited when they find out that I really dive. There's just something about the fact that their teacher is a scuba diver that perks their interest up. And then when I'm able to tie my experiences through my photography and my saltwater tank in my classroom, it just brings science a little bit more alive than simply opening a textbook and saying we're going to now read about something in the ocean.
There's no doubt that many of her students will take up diving when they are old enough, and Joyce is excited about sharing the underwater experience.
The experience of learning how to dive will put them into just such an exciting environment, and instead of passively reading about ecology or history, they'll be actively involved in seeing it. And I think that experience will carry over not only in their education as a youngster, but in their life in the future as well.
What makes this sport so fun? Most say it's the freedom underwater. And Joyce has a dive buddy who can really appreciate that.
I have a very good friend who I started diving with who's in a wheelchair. And I think for me, watching the freedom that he experienced getting out of that wheelchair and just floating effortlessly along the bottom or along a shipwreck just helped me to have a real appreciation for the actual experience of diving.
Divers pair up underwater. It's called the buddy system. You always know your partner has you covered if there is an emergency. Joyce says dive buddies are more than that.
One of the things that I've noticed about my friends, my diving friends, is it's a much more lasting and serious friendship than my skiing friends or friends that are in other recreations. I think there's maybe where each other's support system, the interest that we have, we share with one another. So it's a lot of fun, but there's more to it than that. Yep.
Teaching young people also allows Joyce to share her ethics, which allow taking only pictures and leaving bubbles.
I guess I'm personally very pleased with the change of ethics of the sport diver through the years. Maybe it's because as an educator or as a parent, I'm really glad that sport divers are taking the attitude of leaving the ship alone, not removing the artifacts and leaving it so that it looks like a ship. Because here in the Great Lakes with the freshwater preservation, I would like those ships to look the same for me as they look for the next generation and the following generation. And only if we leave the ships alone will they be there for the children to see later on.
The In-Depth team shares Joyce's philosophy on bringing up artifacts. We believe they should stay on the bottom no matter how small they are. Now, let's head back to Marquette for our creature close-up. Only a few of our trout species are considered native to the Great Lakes, as many were introduced by man for food and sport. There are some fish, though, that have been here all along.
Lake trout are one of the original species that were found in the Great Lakes at the time of European settlement. Actually, there were only 2 of the trout species that are native to the Great Lakes that are still here. That is the lake trout and the brook trout. We also, of course, had the grayling, but they are extinct.
Lake trout nearly faded away as well when a foreign invader found its way into the Great Lakes.
The sea lamprey was responsible for the near extinction of the lake trout in the Great Lakes. Sea lampreys entered the lakes through the Welland Canal back in the 1800s, slowly worked their way north through all of the Great Lakes, and by 1950 there were almost no lake trout left in the lower Great Lakes, although there were some in Lake Superior. Since the coming of sea lamprey control, primarily through the use of specific lampricides, we have managed to bring lampreys under some modicum of control, and we have made the first steps toward reestablishing the lake trout as a primary salmonid species in the Great Lakes.
Found from Alaska down to the Great Lakes, the lake trout is the largest trout native to North America. And while lampreys nearly destroyed the population of trout in the lower lakes, these Lake Superior fish seem to hang in there.
The standard rock lake trout, I believe, were one of the few populations of lake trout that was not lost to the sea lamprey. It is one of the original remnants found in the Great Lakes. And some experiments have been done with attempting to use those standard rock fish in other parts of the Great Lakes. Currently, our best survival of lake trout in Lake Huron and in the lower lakes has been with a strain called the Seneca strain, which we got from a lake out west. And these Seneca lake trout have a slightly different behavior than some of our other strains of lake trout. They apparently swim higher in the water column and don't orient to the bottom quite as much, and as a result they're not as susceptible to sea lamprey attack.
Beautifully colored, the lake trout is also one of the best tasting fish in the Great Lakes.
Actually, lake trout can grow to extreme sizes under the right circumstances. It is not at all unusual to catch lake trout out in the Great Lakes over 15 pounds and even larger. I believe that the world record is in the neighborhood of 69 pounds. So they do have a lot of growth potential, but a lot of that comes from the fact that they live an extremely long time. Unlike the salmon, which typically only live about 4 years, lake trout can easily live over 20 years if they're not caught or killed by a sea lamprey.
Populations are on the rebound, but state hatcheries and especially federal facilities still have their place in keeping the numbers growing.
The federal hatcheries have taken on that responsibility as part of their function of rehabilitating the lakes after the depredations of the sea lamprey. So most of the lake trout planted in Lakes Michigan and Lake Huron come from hatcheries at Pendle's Creek and at Jordan River.
The Laker, a native to our Great Lakes, in our Creature Close-Up this week. Most of us use our fins to propel us through the water, and for many that might be too slow, or if you have a long distance it could be very tiring. Well, why not try a scooter?
What we have here is the basic scooter unit. Is your battery and everything is contained inside the housing here. 4 snaps, the whole nose cone comes off. You have your dual trigger controls down here, and what we've added to it that the manufacturer hasn't, because of using it is we add a little snapback here that you could snap off to your BC, or if you have a crotch strap on your tanks, so that you really don't have to hardly hang on to it, that this does all the pulling behind it. So all you're doing is you're controlling up and down, left, right with it.
The scooter may seem like a toy for divers who are just looking for another gadget, but this transport is crucial for people with mobility problems.
The one thing about diving is that you have to kick with your feet pretty much. And so if you have had a problem, or you have some sort of disease or something like that that's not allowing you to kick properly, but you still want to enjoy the sport of diving, the nice thing about the scooter is that you can clip it off to the front of you. We'll make up a little harness so you don't really even hardly have to hang on to it. You just have to hold the trigger, and you can let the scooter do all the work for you. It opens up a lot of possibilities for people who may not be strong swimmers, or people who want to travel a little bit farther than they can swim with it, with their energy level. We've even got one guy that's paraplegic that uses a scooter so he can enjoy the sport of diving.
Long swims, even over a mile, can be quickly traveled with a single charge of the batteries. Kim uses his cave diving in Florida.
Actually, the cave diving community that has revitalized scooters, because for a number of years scooters were almost non-existent, and they used to be quite popular. But it's the cave diving community to do their deep exploration, to get back into the caves farther than they care to swim.
The prop turns at a constant rate, but the speed can be adjusted to suit each dive.
Which how you change your speed. You have variable pitch props, and so you just change your pitches all the way from 9 all the way back to 1. With the steeper the pitch on 9, digging a little harder. A little bit harder, you're going to go faster, but you're going to burn battery a lot faster, because the engine, the electric motor in there always turns at the same speed. So you control your speed by setting your pitch. Most of the time you dive about a 6 setting on it, and that gives you a couple mile-an-hour speed out of it.
Divers can change direction by turning the scooter or by using their fins as a rudder. It takes some getting used to.
Kind of interesting the first few times you jump on one, because you're moving a lot faster than you're normally used to moving, so you can go up and down pretty quickly if you ain't paying attention to what you're doing.
The scooter is definitely a fun way to get around underwater. Now let's take a look at what's coming up on our next show.
Dive with the in-depth team as we explore shipwrecks that are only partially submerged. First, we'll tour the wreck of the Francisco Morazan. Once a foreign-owned freighter, the ship is now home to countless seagulls and cormorants. We'll find out why the ship ended up here and take a close look below decks. We'll also investigate the Nordmeer. It once stood proudly as a warning to other ships about a dangerous reef. Now it has just about disappeared beneath the waves. Then we'll head closer to Alpena and take a look at the Grecian. The wreck is in a class all by itself, and we'll tour the inside decks to show you what's left. Finally, we'll take a close-up look at the sea lamprey and see how biologists are working to control their populations. All that and a look at dive computers on the next Great Lakes In Depth.
Well, that's about it for this in-depth look at the Great Lakes. I'm Rick Bixter. We'll see you next week.